So it's a very interesting topic, and it relates very directly to some of what we were discussing before about the truth and evil and good versus bad. And that is that you find throughout the Tanakh no small number of examples of tremendous tzaddikim. It's always great, it's inspiring to see righteous people doing good things, even in generations where most of the people were corrupt. And you find also tremendous Rashaim. And these tremendous Rashaim, it's not so easy to say that all these people were stupid or ignorant. The Tanakh doesn't really waste its time describing the lives of idiots. It normally focuses on people who have tremendous potential, people who have tremendous capacities, people who understand certain things, people who achieved exceptional, extraordinary things, and almost without exception, all these people had, the way the Arizal describes, very tremendous neshamot. They really had tremendous spiritual potential. So Ahav, we mentioned it before, is a really good example. Why would he worship the Baal if he was someone who had understandings of certain things? If the guy ended up being a king, okay, he was corrupt, but what do we have to learn from him? Why does the Tanakh waste time on him? And of what interest is it to us that he did so many evil things if at the end of the day we have nothing to learn from it? So maybe you can say it was just to show you how great a tzaddik Eliyahu was. But it's bizarre that we should even care what this guy thinks, what he says, what he does, what he doesn't do. Why is it of any interest to us? There's a very, very powerful limud that also has some very interesting halachic applications as well. And the idea is that, pretty much everyone in every religious group believes that there is some kind of end game, so to speak, in Olam Hazeh. Meaning, very few groups believe that the purpose of the creation and the goal of the world is to stay exactly the way it is right now. The question is only, what is it that we're pushing for? What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to push? What are we trying to invite in terms of situations? So the Gemara is very clear on this in Masechet Sanhedrin. The 11th parak talks a lot about the Geulah, about Mashiach. And the Gemara explains that there seem to be two scenarios for the Geulah. One scenario is Geulah B'Rahamim, Geulah where we do what we're supposed to do, we observe the Torah, we observe the mitzvot, we do teshuvah, and then we obviate the need for maybe or maybe not Gog Magog, but certainly for some of the Yisurim, some of the suffering that's supposed to precede the Messianic era. There are going to be wars, there are going to be trials, tribulations, maybe fires, maybe droughts, maybe famine, maybe all kinds of terrible political goings on. So the possibility exists that we do teshuvah and we save ourselves and perhaps even much of the rest of the world from a lot of this suffering, or that the Geulah happens anyway. Right? It doesn't sound anywhere like the Geulah is going to wait forever, and it's up to us to make it happen and to make sure it happens the right way. That's not the impression Chazal gave us. Quite to the contrary, it sounds like the pasuk that we learn is a pasuk in Yeshaya, where the pasuk says, "Naqatani elef hatzayor Rabah." We young and relatively small or inexperienced people will be proven to be leaders, proven to be great. And the promise of the Geulah is such, where the pasuk ends, "Ani Hashem b'aitah ahishana." I am Hashem. At its time, I will expedite it. And the Gemara points out this is a very interesting contradiction in terms, right? B'aitah, at its time, implies there's a time. So the Geulah, it has a time. When does the time come? The time comes when the time comes.
Do we know, or is it like year 6,000, like I heard, or?
That parak of Gemara is where you have all these predictions.
Okay.
All these discussions, all these predictions, not so clear. In fact, there's a bright in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, where he says, "Shital Feshenin Hawayama." The world is meant to last 6,000 years, and it sounds like in its current state. The first 2,000 were tohu, The first 2,000 were a balagan. The second 2,000 are the 2,000 of Torah. And the final 2,000 were supposed to be the 2,000 of Geulah. ובעוונותינו הרבים יצאו מהם מה שיצאו. The Braita concludes, in our many averot, what happened, it sounds like out of these last 2,000 years, what came out of them came out. Like, it wasn't Geulah. So, the Rishmon is telling you, basically the world was meant to, this process was meant to take place over the course of some 6,000 years. It was supposed to happen much earlier. He's already cried. The Geulah didn't come in his time. What was his time? You're talking about the period of the Tanaim, maybe 1,800 years ago, maybe 1,900 years ago. So you're talking about almost 2,000 years where he expected the Geulah to happen already then. We're right now in 5756, and we're talking about almost 2,000 years ago. That he's telling you the world was ready for Geulah. It was supposed to happen in this second third of the 2,000 years. Because of our averot, it got held up. So the Gemara asks something very curious. Ani Hashem be'itah ahishana. I am Hashem, at its time I will expedite it. So the Gemara says this is a contradiction. If it's at its time, it sounds like there's a time. I don't know what day, I don't know what month, I don't know what year, but there is a time. There's a defined time. There's a definite time to the Geulah. Ahishana seems to imply I will expedite it. I'll make it happen faster. I'll make it come earlier. So decide. There's a fixed date and time, or there isn't. What exactly does it mean? If you tell me on the one hand that there's a day and a time, and you tell me on the other hand that there is no day or time, because at any given moment it can come earlier. So the explanation that Gemara gives, or one of the explanations it attempts to give, Im zachu ahishena, im lo zachu be'itah. If we have zechut, if we have merit, if we make extra efforts in order to bring the Geulah, so it happens, achishana, like the last word of the pasuk comes true. Maybe technically there's something like a time, there's a deadline, but if you have zechut, you make it come faster. And if they don't have the zechut, ve'itah, it's going to happen at a particular time. And here, it's not even a function of your merits. It's not even a function of what you did, what you didn't do, what you believe, what you don't believe. It's a function of timing. The Geulah has to happen at a certain time. You can only make it come faster. You don't have the ability to delay it. You don't have the ability to push it up. Or if you want to define it in relative terms, the only thing you can do for the Geulah is to make it come faster. When you say to delay the Geulah, what you mean is to delay the possibility of having expedited it. So if the Geulah was supposed to come in the year 5756, or 5776, sorry, and we made the Geulah come in 5775, we have expedited it. If it didn't come in 5775, then what happened? We missed an opportunity to make it come faster. We missed an opportunity to make it come earlier.
But whenever it comes, we won't know if it came earlier or later.
It sounds from the Gemara like that's not necessarily true. It sounds from the Gemara that if the Geulah comes earlier, it'll be manifest in more rachamim, it'll be manifested in less suffering. And that if it comes at its time, it comes with all the promised forms of suffering, with all of the wars, with all the disasters, the catastrophes, etc. So making it come earlier is actually supposed to help us avoid all the negative consequences. If it comes early, then it happens to occur in such a way, in such a time, that it makes it easier. It's a shortcut. We don't have to go through all these levels of suffering. If it comes at the naturally, let's say the deadline, for the latest possible Geulah, then it comes d'isurim. Then it comes with suffering, right? Another way of looking at this, and it's not a bad parable, would be childbirth. If the childbirth happens naturally, there's even ways you can make it within a few days, probably happen a little bit earlier. As long as the natural process is stimulated, it can work. As soon as you come to a point where the baby has to come out because the baby's too big and it's already dangerous, then it gets complicated. Then you need to speed up the process. It's not natural. It's potentially more painful and more dangerous. So, the Vilna Gaon, in discussing this Gemara, told his Talmidim in the 18th century in Lithuania the time for Hoshaanah is long gone, and it's not going to happen. He said, Hoshaanah, making the Geulah happen faster, this was a few centuries ago, maybe a millennium ago. He said, at this point, we're lucky the Geulah should happen at its deadline, at its otherwise scheduled time. Already that's going to be a lot.
So it means that no matter whether or not we do Teshuvah or not, there's absolutely nothing we're going to do.
According to the Vilna Gaon, the amount of Teshuvah we would have to do, or the amount of people who would have to do Teshuvah, or the intensity of the Teshuvah that we would have to accomplish, is still not enough in order to bring to make a significant change in the nature of the Geulah. That was his opinion.
So
I
who's
can't
the
say
more
that he was a prophet,
upbeat
I can't say he wasn't.
and inspiring position?
Do we have other opinions?
Yeah, do we have?
Well, actually, there's something even more depressing than this.
Okay.
And this is the interpretation of this Gemara by a number of creative spiritual thinkers, but unfortunately who go to the Beit Midrash of Yetzer Hara. And that is based on a number of our sources, one of them being the Mishnah, the famous Midrash that talks about Yetziat Mitzrayim, where we say in the Haggadah that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't take us out of Egypt then, we would have remained there, we would all still be Abdim Pharaoh Mitzrayim, we would all still be slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. So the Midrash explains, why is this? Because if there are 50 levels of Tumah, we were at level 49 and a half. Meaning we had one foot in the grave. Am Yisrael had just about committed national suicide. The only things we were holding on to were Hebrew as a language, giving Hebrew names, and not changing our clothes. By the way, very interesting. If you draw a parallel to modern Hebrew society, one thing that you can say to the Jews' credit is that almost the entire state of Israel speaks Hebrew today, and a lot of them give their kids names in Hebrew. Not necessarily very intelligent names, but they do give their kids names in Hebrew. Recently it's become stylish to give the kids all kinds of non-Jewish names, which is unfortunate, but at least in Egypt we had that. The Midrash explains in Mitzrayim that we had reached such a low level of Tum'ah that it almost obligated HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take us out. What do you mean obligated? Can you force HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do something or not to do something? Absolutely not. Is it possible for us to mess up HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creation in such a way that the only way for the creation not to implode is for Hashem to intervene? The answer is yes. According to the rules that HaKadosh Baruch Hu established when He created the world, certain things were not meant to be. And one of them is Am Yisrael is not supposed to assimilate and commit national suicide. We were so close to doing it in Egypt that we left before we were ready. Right? By the way, how's that reflected?
The Arab didn't come out with us.
Well, first of all, the Arab came out with us because the birur wasn't properly done. We didn't properly separate the neshamot. We didn't have the time to do it. Second of all, that we left from Egypt so quickly we didn't even have the time for the bread to rise. Right? They baked the bread. So we left Egypt so quickly, so urgently, that we didn't have the time to make some of the preparations we otherwise might have made. In other words, yes, it's true that we had to leave Egypt. Yes, it's true that we left, relatively speaking, in good condition. 80% of the Jews didn't come. And even the 20% that left, it looks like they wouldn't have made it out either if Am Yisrael had reached a lower level than this. So we left, and we had to leave so quickly that we didn't have time to bake bread, which was surprising, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the entire world. He split the sea. He brought the Egyptians Asir Makot, the 10 plagues. He destroyed the base. He couldn't give us 20 minutes to make pita. We couldn't leave Egypt with lafa. We couldn't 18 minutes, not even right? He couldn't give us another 18 minutes. So he can split the sea and the water can stand like ice. And we can't have bread. So it represents, at a certain level, the fact that we weren't completely prepared for leaving Egypt, which is why 3 days later already we're complaining we want to go back.
And we dealt with it like 2 weeks later.
Which is why 49 and a half days later, we weren't on a level that merits much of a Geulah. But there's a very, very interesting point. And this point goes back even further than this. If you look back, for example, on Parashat Noah, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Noah, this is the end of all the living creatures that I created because they're all corrupt. In this context, he's referring to sexual corruption. So I'm going to destroy all of them. I'm destroying everything. Only you, what's inside the teva, the animals and the birds that you bring with you, according to the midrash, the fish, because they weren't included in this corruption, and everything else gets destroyed. Everything else is going to be ruined. After the Mabul, what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu promise Noah?
He's never going to do the Mabul again.
He'll never, well, he didn't say he's not going to destroy the world again. He's not going to bring a Mabul. Meaning he won't destroy the world again by water. Maybe it'll be by fire, maybe other things, but it won't happen with water. That's why Sodom was so surprised. The fire coming from the sky caught them off guard. So, we thought we were going to be flooded here. Where were we flooded? We flooded with something else. So, what happens right after the Mabul? After HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes this promise, he's not destroying the world with water anymore.
When he went to build, when he was trying to build the nation or trying the land, and he had the problem with three sons and the ones that had done the bad thing.
So we had what happened with Ham happened, and then right afterwards it gave rise to a very interesting political movement. What's this political movement that when they began to settle Eretz Shina'ar? Dora Pelaga. Dora Pelaga, they built Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel. So what's the idea of Migdal Bavel?
Against the
They wanted to go. They wanted to go as high as to
fight
Shamayim.
again.
So Hashem just destroyed the world a few generations ago. Okay.
So he said, let's fight.
I was almost born in Germany. My mother left. She was 9 months pregnant, and she left Germany because it was only at this time 30 years after the war. And she said, it's too soon. I'm just not ready to have a child born in Germany. It doesn't sound right. Family from Morocco, it still bothered her. She didn't lose anyone in her personal family, but it bothered her. She moved back to New Jersey. My father had to close up and come back a few weeks later. So here you're talking about a few generations after the entire creation was destroyed with Mabul. And here we have a movement that unifies people in challenging and fighting HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And by the way, they're described, what unifies this movement is the unification itself. They managed to get every single person, every single group, every single relative on board with this war they want to wage against religion. Right? Sounds very much like postmodern Europe. Everyone is against religion in all of its shape, in all of its forms, in all of its sizes. There's only one person who doesn't agree to this whole deal. Right?
No.
Avraham Avinu.
No.
Avraham Avinu is opposed to Nimrod, who's trying to bring the entire world to a very unfortunate place. If the entire world, except for Avraham, agrees to this, Avraham is the only obstacle, right? Let me ask you an interesting question. What might have happened if the entire world agreed and Avraham was included?
Agreed to
build Migdal Bavel, to fight against Hashem. They want to reject completely the dominion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu over his creation. He just promised he wasn't going to destroy the world again by way of a flood.
Well, he could have destroyed it by anything else.
In theory, he could. He could just kill everyone, right?
Yeah.
And there'd be nothing left.
Yeah.
Is that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants?
No, probably not. What's
So
the
it's
point?
very interesting, because you go back to Amjad Awadi, if this guy tells you, you're all stupid, I'm going to get released, I'm eventually going to be traded, and no one, we're going to continue killing you this way because you're not going to stop us, and you've made this manifest, you've made this evident, so he wins, right?
Yeah.
He can do whatever he wants, and he's going to get released, and he's going to get released, and he's going to do it again.
Yeah.
What happened to humanity during Dora Pelaga is they say to themselves, wait, HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised he's not going to destroy the whole world, right? Hashem is not interested in killing the Rasha, he's interested in the Rasha doing teshuvah. But if you already told me that you're not going to destroy the world, or in the case of the modern state of Israel, you already told me that you're going to release me, right?
So why should I not go to fight it?
Why should I not? Of course I will.
Worship,
There's nothing to stop me, nothing to prevent me from doing it. You already let the cat out of the bag. You already released the secret information. We control the world. We're in control of the world right now. We're not going to subject ourselves to your laws. You created us. We're the ones who make the decisions right now. This is the mirror. This is the nature of the rebellion. It wasn't just, I want to be a chiloni, you want to be a dati. You have your lifestyle, I have mine.
The power is with us.
The power is with us. We're going to unify. We're going to unify in order to challenge the imposition of these laws on us and our lifestyles. We want to fight this, we want to challenge this, and if we're all together, you can't destroy all of us. And that's why Avraham Avinu was so despised, why he was so hated by the Rashaim who were behind this plan, because as far as they were concerned, he was the only exception to the rule. Because they could be destroyed, Abraham could be saved just like Noah. And we're right back where we started. And if that had to happen, Akash Baruch Hu could have done it. So they tried to kill Abraham, Akash Baruch Hu saves him, and he says, look, separate yourself from these people. I'm not going to destroy all of them. I'm going to disperse them. I'm not going to destroy them. I'm going to give the powerful neshamot, I'm only giving to you from now on. That's the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that tells you, Asara dorot me'adam ad Noach, Asara dorot me'Noach Abraham, עד שבא אברהם אבינו וקיבל שכר כולם. Right? להראות כמה אלפיים לפניו, to show you how patient הקדוש ברוך הוא is, that the entire world, שהיו כל הדורות מכעיסין ובאים, all the generations got progressively worse and angered Hashem, until Abraham Avinu came, וקיבל שכר כולם, and he got the reward for all of them. What's this? Rav Tzadok Kohen Milublin explains the name of the Arizal. Simple. The sachar that he gets, the neshamot.
Yeah.
All of the powerful neshamot, all of the creative neshamot, all of the strong neshamot with neshmatic potential are now going through Abraham. This is the reward that he gets for being a tzaddik when everybody else wants to obey the laws. So, this movement of rebellion against HaKadosh Baruch Hu and taking control over the creation, this is the definition of Yetzer Hara. But this movement, it goes through reincarnations in different generations. Basically, what's the philosophy behind it? There are two ways to bring the Geulah. There's the possibility of bringing the Geulah by doing chesed, by doing tzedakah, by teaching Torah, by teaching people to reform their lifestyle. This is the Geulah b'rachamim. The other possibility of bringing the Geulah is that the world becomes so disastrously corrupt, so spiritually retarded, that it's impossible for humanity to extricate itself from this situation, and it almost forces Hashem's hand, so to speak, as it did in Egypt. It forces Hashem's hand and brings the Geulah not in necessarily a happy way. It brings the Geulah by way of Tum'ah. In other words, if you want to distill this, there's two possibilities for the Geulah. There's the Geulah de Kedusha. There's the Geulah that comes because we force it to come. How do we force it to come? We force it to come by doing good things. We force it to come by observing the Torah and observing the mitzvot. We force it to come because we are righteous, we deserve this. It's our sachar, it's our reward for fighting temptations and for overcoming obstacles and for observing the Torah and the mitzvot. And there's the Geulah, where humanity forces HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, for the sake of not destroying the entire creation, we force HaKadosh Baruch Hu to intervene in order to save humanity from itself. Okay? There were movements of people who believed that the more tum'ah they can inspire in the world, and the more tum'ah they can spread, the more of a favor they're doing to humanity. This is effectively the socialist New World Order, if you will. All these movements that are all about making official, making accepted, getting recognition for alternative lifestyles, for drug use, for homosexual behavior, for promiscuity, unfortunately, have, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, a profound belief that it's possible to contaminate the world in such a way as to make the Geulah come faster. Why? Because they've given up on Kedusha. They've given up on the possibility of doing teshuvah. They've given up on humanity's ability to save itself. They don't believe it's possible, or they don't believe it's worth the wait, because so many people are being lost in the meantime, so much time is going by. There was a psychopath, I don't know if you saw this, in Arut Sheva. They caught a guy in Hebron who was this pseudo-phony Kabbalist. And who was a Jewish guy who was encouraging Jewish girls to take drugs and have relations with Arabs. You didn't see this?
TSC again.
The same thing all over again.
Crazy.
All right, why? Because he saw in the Zohar Kadosh that it feeds the klipot, and because this is what gives koach to the Torah Chara. And so, what can you do? You can create such a tumah,
accelerate,
give so much koach,
process,
as if to say that you can accelerate the right, like taking steroids instead of working out. So it's insanity. It's absolute insanity that people believe in this. But this was the belief of Shabtai Tzvi. This was the belief of a man who was learned in Torah. You know that he had rabbis who supported him, right?
Yeah, a lot.
Rav Yonatan Eibshitz was one of the first rabbis who identified him as a fraud and who tried to convince people who believed in him, people who thought this guy had intellect, that he had Torah, that he had Chokhmah, that he had Kabbalistic insights. Rav Avshitz proved, even Al-Pi Kabbalah, this guy's wrong. And he's crazy. But this is why he and his Talmidim would do terrible things with a talit and tefillin. They would have homosexual relationships with each other. They would trade wives with each other. These aren't things that we talk about during most of the rest of the year, but the depth of the depravity of his behaviors. He used to wear a talit and tefillin. He would eat pork. He would make the bracha Baruch Matir Asurim. You know, it's if you understand the whole concept of the nitzotzot and you have the koach to bring them up. So even for most of the Jewish nations, it's asur, but for him it's mutar because he has such a tremendous neshama that he can uplift even the hazir. So the secularist movement subconsciously has this as the core belief. They believe that by pushing everybody to be chilonim, and by the way, this is the unfortunately, a lot of Jews made this terrible mistake. If you follow the developments of the 19th century, it really was, there were a lot of Jews who believed that secular communism was the Mashiach.
Or
was
their geula from all their society they are living living in Europe, in Russia, that they were so suffering from everything.
They believed that the religion was the reason they were suffering, and that they believed that utopia was that if you convince everyone to be secular, and at least they all get along, even if it means forcing it, if they all get along and they all reject the ruchaniut, they reject spirituality, then you've brought about some kind of geula. Okay? What's the problem? The problem is communism and socialism have killed more people than war. Religious wars never killed as many people as communist Russia, as communist China, as communist Cuba, and now look at communist Venezuela is going the same way.
Just to try and understand, I mean the generations, the secular generations, it was not really exclusive for the geula or redemption. They were trying to be like, their benefits for their benefits to it's their
they were trying to they weren't so sophisticated.
Yeah.
Already look, the Rambam talks about Avodah Zarah. And he says, how did Avodah Zarah start? Nobody was stupid enough to believe that the sun created them. Because the sun sets. Abraham Avinu, when he was 3 years old, he figured this out. Nobody's stupid enough to believe that the moon created them. Or the statues. So he said in the beginning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu expected everyone to worship him without a face, without a body, without any physical manifestations, without any physical representation. It became too difficult for people to do this and to keep an abstract understanding. So they said, look, I don't believe the sun is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, but I'm going to pray to it because it reminds me there's nothing more powerful, nothing that gives more light and more life and more strength. It feeds the plants feed the animals feed me. Nothing is more powerful in Hashem's creation than the sun. And so I'm praying to the sun because it's the greatest manifestation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's strength and life-giving power. And then you had competing ideologies. The moon shines even when the sun doesn't, but sometimes the moon doesn't shine. You have the stars. Maybe the stars are greater than the sun, but they're more distant. Already then the people knew this.
Yeah.
So you have, but it's very close to what we do when we do Birkat HaChama or Birkat HaLevana.
No,
Birkat HaLevana.
I mean, the idea is the same. We thank Hashem for the sun and the moon, but then it kind of shifted.
Only by way of parable. We recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised us through the Nevi'im that just like the moon waxes and wanes, just like the moon grows and shrinks, so too Am Yisrael in the future will reach a state of full revelation, a state of full manifestation, if you will. So it's not that we don't pray to the moon, Chas v'Shalom, we just recognize that the moon symbolizes for us part of our redemption.
As well, when say the Levana is symbolized for us, they're called the Malchut. The David Melech is the Malchut. So the Malchut. So as well, when we make a pray to the Levana is not the moon. The Levana is that something beyond the moon. The moon is just a rock, is a star. It's beyond that, but we don't have any this ability even to think and to touch it. We cannot touch it. Of course, we cannot touch but as well, we don't pray to the Malchut, We just pray to Hashem that we want Him to give us His control to Malchut to us as well, and that's the redemption.
The idea is that the moon itself is not Chas v'Shalom a deity. It's not the source of any koach. It doesn't do anything. It's an object. It's a physical object. it just symbolizes for us certain things. And so at this particular time of the month, we make a bracha about the redemption. How the moon reminds us of our redemption. The same thing with the sun. We make brakat hama only because the sun itself represents a tremendous koach, represents the strength. And even the sun itself has some kind of systematicity, some kind of regularity to it. And so we recognize that there's a certain symbolic value to the sun having its time, having its place, and having its rotation. And we acknowledge this, but we're not, God forbid, praying to the sun. We're making a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, inspired by the sun and the way that He created it.
Isn't that how this Avodah Zarah started, and then they shifted?
Avodah Zarah was, I want to pray to Hashem, I can't, so I'm going to pray to the most impressive manifestation of divinity that I can find. So I pray to the sun, but really it's supposed to remind me of Hashem. Here we're not praying to the sun, we're praying to Hashem, but we make we have Tefillat Arvit, we have Tefillat Shachrit. I'm not praying to the sun, I'm praying Hetzachama this morning. We're going to pray with the Hetzachama. Praying to the sun. But when the sun rises, it's an especially auspicious time for us to be in Tefillah. Why? Because as soon as the light hits the planet, already I'm sitting with my talit and I'm waiting for the sun to rise to pray at the earliest possible time. So this concept, this belief that we can determine how the Geulah happens is not completely wrong. In other words, we saw this in Egypt. This was the belief of Migdal Bavel. We can make the rules. We can determine what we want and what we don't want. We can reject certain things and rebel against certain things. That's why Nimrod was such a Rasha. It wasn't just that he had a crazy idea, but he managed to convince the rest of humanity this is the right thing to do and we should do it. And you find that the Rashaim, true, what you're saying, the communists, they didn't believe in Mashiach. But they believed this was the perfect reality. This was the utopia. And how do you achieve the utopia? Well, if being Jewish and being separate and being different only created anti-Semitism, it only created jealousy and animosity and it created violence, maybe if I give up the Torah, give up the mitzvot, maybe then they like me. So for them, it was Geulah. For them, this is utopia, a perfect reality. You can't fight with me because you're not Jewish, you're not Catholic, you're not Christian, you're not Orthodox, you're not Muslim. We're all the same. And if we're all the same, we have no reason to fight. And if nobody's fighting, guess what? Lo yisa goy goy harif, lo yilmadu od milchama. Right, except when you actually examine these movements, you find these are some of the most violent movements in human history.
Yeah.
Communism easily killed 50 million people. Communist China will never know how many people they killed. And all this in the name of their supposed utopia, the name of their supposed Geulah. This is, according to the Arizal, the decision that Ahav had to make, and the decision that a lot of Roshaim in the Tanakh had to make, which was, do I believe the Geulah can happen by positive contributions, positive mitzvot, positive attitudes, by studying Torah, by observing the mitzvot, or do I quit on humanity? Do I quit and not fulfill my half of the deal? Do I join forces with the Roshaim? Do I join forces with the Sitra Hara? I try to bring the Geulah in a negative way. Do I try to expedite the process by contributing so much evil and inspiring people to do so much evil that Hashem has, so to speak, no choice but to save the creation by forcing the Geulah to come? It's not a good idea. Chas v'shalom. We're not proud of the fact that in Mitzrayim we had such a low spiritual level that the Geulah had to happen. We see that it didn't last very long. The next Geulah is going to be a permanent Geulah. The only problem is that we'd like as many people as possible to merit. And so if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is waiting for us, He's only waiting that we should do teshuvah, we should bring it about. But unfortunately, a lot of these movements, and again, based on what we just said before, a lot of these arguments are very sophisticated.
Yeah.
If someone comes and tells you, you know what, why don't we just put the ethnic differences aside? The Jews and Arabs, we can live together, we can learn together, we can marry each other's daughters. Why don't we just stop fighting over religion and live a life of peace and harmony?
Yeah.
You see, with a little bit of sophisticated perspective, how the people who say this, Ani shalom v'chi adaber, hem ala milchama. The same people that are trying to convince the Jews to let go of their ethnicity don't mind if the Arabs are psycho-terrorists. They don't care if they're jihadists, they don't care if they're fundamentalists. They tell the Jews, drop your mitzvot, and they don't care if the Arabs don't do it either. Even what they're offering you is a lie. Even when they tell you, you can bring utopia, you can bring the Mashiach, you can bring Geulah by stopping to be Jewish. And for some reason, when it comes to the Arabs, nobody tells the Arabs stop being Arabs. Nobody tells them put down the Quran, nobody tells them reject your religion. Chas v'shalom, they would never do it. The difference between the Geulah b'rachamim, and the Geulah b'choach, so to speak, where it comes against our will, is that our goal is to minimize the suffering. Our goal is to minimize the pains, the difficulty, the tzirei lidah, these birth contractions. And that's the purpose of any good intervention. If you want something to happen, your goal is to make it happen in the best, smoothest, most peaceful, most positive way. If you want to force it and you want to bring it in a negative way, you're creating more damage than you are good. Even if the Geulah ultimately comes, you're causing people to be excluded from it, and unfortunately you're causing precious nefashot to be lost.
Mm-hmm.
So we want the Geulah to come. We don't want it to come so fast or so violently that so many people are lost. But these movements that pretend to be acting in the best interest of humanity, acting in the best interest of the world, if you scratch a little bit under the surface, you find that they're really Rashaim, who are looking to, if anything, create some kind of an evil utopia where they manage to eradicate the Torah, eradicate the mitzvot. Incidentally, go back to the Megillat Esther. What's the argument of Haman about this whole concept? Of all the 127 nations over which Ahashverosh rules, there's only one nation that's not like everybody else. So according to Haman, the world would be perfect without them. The same thing the Germans would say.
No loss.
Exactly. It's not even worth it to leave them alone. It costs you money to fight them, but the money's worth it. It's a little bit of a sacrifice, but it's better this way. The Germans, the same thing. They're willing, they're willing to commit suicide. They're willing to lose. 10 million, 12 million Germans died during the war. They don't care. To kill 6 million Jews, it's worth it. That was the mentality. And how do they make the world a better place? By fighting, by killing, by suffering. They see the Jews as different, and they say, if this nation wasn't different, everything would be good. If this nation wasn't separate from everyone else, everybody would be happy.
The reasons for all the problems.
They point to us as the reason for all the problems. Very subconsciously, we should be solving the world's problems, and we're not. The Goyim hate us. It's not Sinah L'Shem Shamayim, but we should be doing more in order to help the world solve its problems. The challenge is doing it in a positive way. It's doing it in such a way that it saves people, that it brings them close to Torah, close to mitzvot, that it creates a Kiddush Hashem, makes them want to do more. Trying to force people, on the one hand, to be religious, or on the one hand, to be non-religious, unfortunately, is only going to end in disaster one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But the Geulah is certainly not going to come any faster or any more peacefully if we give up on Yetzer Tov, if we give up on the Torah, we give up on the mitzvot. Our goal is to make it come in the most peaceful way possible, to inspire and encourage people to want the Geulah and to bring it in positive actions, and not chas v'shalom to give in to the culture of debauchery, of lies, and of broken promises that is the secularization of the world, as if leaving the Torah, leaving the mitzvot, and leaving our identity is going to make the world a better and more peaceful place. That we've heard that promise before, and it only results in more oppression, in more dictatorships, more tyranny, and in the end, more death and more suffering. So, B'ezrat Hashem, the Geulah should come in a quick and peaceful way. The suffering should be minimized to the extent absolutely necessary. And B'ezrat Hashem, we should have the zechut of having brought it in a faster and more peaceful way, which really would be a merit for all of humanity.
Amen.
Stop it. Yeah.